Welcome to our May 27, 2019 regular meeting. First of all, I like to call tonight's regular meeting to order. First, recommendation that the regular meeting be suspended and the committee of the whole meeting be convened. Moved by Councillor Nish, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. I'd like to call tonight's committee of the whole meeting to order. First of all, I'd like to read the statement of chair on the procedure for committee of the whole meeting. For those of you present this evening and for those watching via television, let me please explain that a committee of the whole meeting is a committee that consists of all members of council. This meeting allows council members to deal with issues in greater detail but is less formal than a regular council meeting. During this meeting, issues are not formally adopted, but recommendations may be made at the next regular council meeting. At this time, the recommendation of the previous committee of the whole meeting will be adopted and acted upon. Some key points to remember when making your presentations are: remember, council meetings are televised, and it is very important to introduce yourself and, if applicable, name of the organizations that you are representing and speak directly into the microphone in a clear voice. When presenting, please address any comments or questions to the chair of the meeting. Keep your presentation brief. 5 minutes would be ideal, as council has several presentations on their agenda. Once you have completed your presentation, please ensure you summarize any requests or concerns. The chair will then ask council members if they have any questions. Remember, there will be no decision made at this meeting on any requests or concerns you have made. Lastly, requests will be referred to staff for review, report, and recommendation to council. Council meetings are very, very full. We would appreciate your consideration of your time. Now, recommendation that agenda for the committee of the whole meeting of May 27, 2019 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Eddy, second by Councillor Mru. Discussion? All in favor? Motion carried. So first item of the business is petition and delegation. So we have Chris Lightfoot, Complete Street for Prince Rupert. Please welcome.
Hello, my name is Chris Lightfoot and I represent Complete Streets for Prince Rupert. Tonight I'd like to present the BC Healthy Living Alliance Communities on the Move Declaration. So first of all, I'll give you a little bit of background. The BC Alliance for Healthy Living is an umbrella organization that represents various nonprofit organizations around the province who all have a vested interest in improving community health outcomes. For example, BC Cancer Society, Heart and Stroke Foundation, United Way, YMCA, etc. So last summer, the executive from the Healthy Living Alliance contacted me because they had heard about Complete Streets for Prince Rupert and our shared goals of improving infrastructure to facilitate active transportation, to make it easy, safe, and enjoyable to get around by various means. And they asked me to promote the Communities on the Move Declaration in Prince Rupert. For full disclosure, I received $1,500 to help promote the Communities on the Move Declaration, and those funds have been channeled towards Complete Streets for Prince Rupert, and not for my personal gain. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Communities on the Move Declaration. It's all about creating smart, fair, and healthy transportation options for all communities across the province. And the vision statement of the declaration, I'll read out. We envision that in 10 years across BC, in communities small and large, it will be safe, easy, and enjoyable to get around, whether by walking, biking, public transit, driving, ride-sharing, or in a wheelchair. We want to see the provincial government making progressive investments that support active, connected, and healthy communities with a wide range of mobility needs. I thought this would be great for Prince Rupert. It's something that our organization holds as well. So specifically, the values are mobility and safety for everyone, healthy communities, clean air and environment, consideration of community needs, and savings for savings and economic opportunity. These are brought about by realizing the vision. So the declaration outlines how to achieve the vision. First of all, the calling upon the province to increase support and long-term funding for transit, specifically $400 million a year for the BC Transit Strategic Plan, supporting the TransLink Mayor's Council 10-year vision, and also to improve transit services for rural and remote small towns, for example, Prince Rupert. Another way to achieve the goal is by promoting a provincial active transportation strategy. The transportation strategy is being written right now in consultation with partners across the province. One of the asks is to allocate $100 million a year over 10 years to facilitate construction of active transportation infrastructure, as well as active school travel planning to make it easy to get to school on foot, bike, or transit. There's also a commitment to equity, which means improving handy-dart service, improving transit for peoples with disabilities, and ensuring that funding is allocated equitably where it may be of most benefit. The declaration also holds regional considerations. Getting around in Prince Rupert or in the north is different than in the Lower Mainland or in Vancouver. So it needs to take into account our rural transportation strategies, winter design standards, supporting the Mayor's Council to pursue a variety of funding tools, and continue and expand the UPass program, which is a transit pass for secondary, university, college level, post-secondary students. And finally, a commitment to safety. So the declaration calls on members and calls on the provincial government to support the BC road safety strategy with the goal of safe streets and zero fatalities. The boosting of enforcing speed limits and prioritizing safety measures for vulnerable road users. So the declaration has been endorsed by over 130 communities and organizations across the province, many of which from northern BC, Smithers, Burns Lake, Queen Charlotte, small towns, Penticton, business organizations, as well as major health nonprofits and environmental nonprofits, for example, the David Suzuki Foundation, and many more. We find that the declaration aligns with the commitments outlined in the 2007 official community plan for Prince Rupert. For example, the city has a strong commitment to overall community health and will foster opportunities for non-vehicular transportation, integrating cycling trails and pedestrian links as part of a more sustainable approach to connecting the various segments of the community. And we find that this declaration also aligns with the city budget. That is, there are no cost or budget implications for the city of Prince Rupert associated with signing the declaration. Basically, the declaration is a petition for communities and groups around the province to encourage the provincial government to spend more money on local infrastructure to make it easy to get around without a car. So I call and Complete Streets for Prince Rupert calls upon the community to sign the declaration and join the movement of other communities and groups across British Columbia. Thank you.
Right.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that there was a bit of a mix-up 4 weeks ago, and I'm glad you came back, and I'm glad that we've heard from you. I spent a little time this afternoon looking through the website, and it really is quite a broad coalition of groups and interests with some really aspirational objectives that I think are fantastic. I do have two specific questions. One is, a lot of it I think hinges on provincial commitments. And do you have any sense of the level of interest the province has shown so far? Do we know where that's at with the province? That's one question. And the other question is more local in terms of the kinds of things that we can do here. I mean, it's a big shopping list of different things that that fit the categories. So I would want to know, from your perspective, what are the 2 or 3 locally doable priorities that you would like to see happen?
In regards to your first question, how interested is the province? Just in March, I think the province opened up consultations to determine what to include in their active transportation strategy. And so I'm looking forward to hearing the outcomes and what kind of suggestions that people have had. I think that the fact that they've started the conversation is a good step. I don't have any further specifics around how close the province is to endorsing and to acting upon the suggestions included in the declaration. But I think that given their interest in active transportation, I would say I'm hopefully optimistic, cautiously optimistic. Let's just put it that way. And the second question, what could be done in Prince Rupert? One of the suggestions we outline at our Complete Streets website is it would be nice to have a complete path from east to west through 3rd Avenue West, and by complete, I would mean safe, accessible, and enjoyable for people in wheelchairs or bicycle and cars. Would you feel comfortable letting your 8-year-old ride across town through 3rd Avenue? Would an elderly person feel comfortable crossing the street, or could you get downtown on a power chair or a wheelchair? So I think that is maybe that's a big first step to take, and how to get there. Perhaps focus on immediately scary, dangerous intersections, as outlined by history of crashes or by community suggestion as to where they have problems. One thing that we're thinking about doing is asking parents. I work at the school district, and I'm talking to parents and teachers. We found that many more families are driving their kids to school instead of letting them walk or bike. It'd be interesting to know why that is the tendency. So how can we get the kids to be active on their way to school? Okay.
Just a comment, just to thank you for coming out again regardless of the mishap. I really appreciate your presentation. I think these are some very important topics that you touched on, so thanks again for your presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Yes. Okay, so any member from the audience like to speak on any issues or have any question or any concern, please come forward.
Okay. How many of you know me? He does. He does. He might. Not really. I met you once before you got elected. And I know you. I gave each of you some paperwork.
So please state your name and address for
Oh,
the record.
I'm sorry. Yeah, yes. My name is Lothar Shiza. This is regarding something happened to me personally, and it involves a bylaw. But I have to give a preamble. I'm a person with disabilities. And for many, many years, using a bicycle, I was collecting scrap metal. And I was cleaning it and sorting it and piloting it in my backyard. And there was a trailer, and then behind the trailer. What happened is the bio people here made contact with my landlord, who happens to be living in Vancouver. And the nature of the property is such that it's so run down that for a long time there's no delivery, no mail delivery to the place. I have had much problem with the post office here trying to keep my mail. I've had stuff sent back that cost me all kinds of money. And after my dad passed away, legal documents went back to him. So you can imagine what I've been through. And here's the funny thing, is a lot of people in this town know me. The RCMP for definitely know me because of all the weird, illegal kind of goings on in the building of other tenants. As an example, last year, about June, July, there was an RCMP standoff on that street. It was my building. Okay? I'm the only sane one in the place. The other guy that's in the building is now in jail. I put him in jail. It turns out he's a pedophile. He was the guy that got bonked on the head with an axe from the guy down below who's a orangutan. And somehow he's still there. I can't figure it out. But anyways, getting back to this here. Like I say, the RCMP know me well. Not as a person that creates bullshit, okay, but as a person who stands up and points fingers and says, hey, investigate this, investigate that, let me put it this way. One night coming home, I got stopped by a constable, not because I was doing something wrong, because he told me, he says, we're pressing charges against the neighbor who got bonked on the head, the pedophile. So it gives you an idea. What I'm trying to get across here is nobody made an effort, a real effort, to let me know what was going down. That they had threatened my landlord with a big fine. And the other thing would be that they would bring city crew in and clean up. Well, as a result of that, if you take a moment and tally up what's on here, the landlord got the money. right? The reason I'm here is I'm really perturbed the way this was done. I was not informed. I have no. And here's the other thing. Dates were March 20th to 22nd. While this was going on, I was smitten by Giardia. You know what problem we had with the water? Yeah, projectile puking, projectile the other way, coming out the other way, for 5 days. I went through 3 doctors at the hospital before I finally got Croft, and he agreed with me that yeah, we'll do a test for that, a specific test for that. It's not just a general test; it's a very specific test, eh? So there's nothing I could have done to stop this. So I'm wondering, like, I'm of the mind of taking you guys to court, small claims court. I'll let the dust settle down. I mean, I what I'm trying to get across is I think there should be some kind of investigation as how this went down. So that the next instance where you deal with bylaws, you don't do the same thing to another person. That was what I'm trying to get across here. Okay. Any questions?
Nope. Thanks for your presentation.
Okay. Will somebody be getting back to me, or? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll deal with whatever.
I can't hear you.
Responds.
I can't hear you.
He said,
Okay, well, let me put it this way. I really don't know what I'm going to be doing, how I'm going to be doing it. But it was just a thought in my head to make you guys aware of what went down with me, what I endured. The monies that you see here, this was so that I can get the hell out of this town and go over to Haida Gwaii and retire. Do my last year's over at Haida Gwaii. But
okay, he got so he said he will get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else from public like to speak? Thank you. Welcome.
My name's Judy Riddell. I work at the Berry Patch Child Care Resource and Referral Center. I am a parent of 3 grown daughters raised in Prince Rupert here. And I just wanted to give my sincere gratitude to the council for going ahead with applying for funding for a child care plan to be worked on in the near future. I think you're going to look at the contract and find out who's going to do that for us. It's really important for the child care field to be working with the community and coming up with this plan to have enough spaces for all the parents and enough of the right type of spaces and where they could be located to best serve the community. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so excited to see us progress with this in the next year. And I look forward to all of the recommendations and to seeing how they can be integrated into our community plan and also develop an economic plan, because it's definitely part of the economy, allowing people to go to work, both parents, which is what's happening in families these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think anybody has a question? Yeah, thanks. I think we are discussing in the regular meeting tonight. Yeah. Anybody else from audience like to speak? Second time, anybody else from audience like to speak? Third and final time, anybody else like to speak up about any issues or any concerns? Seems none. Like to entertain motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting and reconvene our regular meeting. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Skelton Morvan. Question? All in favor? Carried. Recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of May 27, 2019 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Nish, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Our next one is recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting of May 13, 2019 be adopted. Moved by Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Nish. Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Recommendation that the minutes of the public hearing of May 13, 2019 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Eddy, seconded by Councillor Moreau. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item is petition and delegation. We have our draft tsunami study results. So please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, respected members of Council. Myself, Philippe Saint-Germain, and my colleague, Graham Barstad, it is a pleasure to be here this evening to present the findings of our assessment of tsunami risks in Prince Rupert, a study conducted by Northwest Hydraulic Consultants, for which I work in close collaboration with the Arlington Group and Ocean Networks Canada. First, I'd like to acknowledge that this project was the contribution of many individuals, notably Dr. John Clegg from the University of Simon Fraser University, Surrey, a very renowned geologist and also emeritus scientist of the Geological Survey of Canada. So, being situated next to the Pacific Ocean, the city of Prince Rupert is susceptible to tsunami risks coming from the ocean, but conceivably from local landslides. This project was funded by the National Disaster Mitigation Program with the following objectives, which were to identify seismic and landslide tsunami hazard in this vicinity, conduct flood modeling, conduct a hazard, risk, and vulnerability analysis, to then incorporate these findings into emergency preparedness, mitigation, planning, and response initiatives of the city. The study region is shown on this slide here, and The blue extent shows the area for which flood maps illustrating inundation depth and flow velocities, or in other words, currents, were established, while the vulnerability and risk assessment was localized within the yellow extent. So you have on Digby Island, you have the airport area and also most of the jurisdiction of the city, and some consideration was also given to the Metaketla village. Now, for this presentation, I will speak to the first piece, the flood maps, or the definition of the tsunami hazard, and my colleague Graham will speak with respect to the risk assessment. Now, in terms of tsunami hazard, looking at seismic tsunamis, or tsunamis that can be generated from an earthquake, essentially, there are several subduction zones around the Pacific Ocean. A subduction zone essentially is an area where you have tectonic plates that override one another. And what happens is when they slip, there's a sudden uplift motion of the seafloor that then generates a sudden uplift of the water above it, which then propagates or generate waves that propagates. Now, these waves can travel very from far distances, hundreds of kilometers an hour. It can come from any of these subduction zones around the Pacific Ocean. However, in the case of Prince Rupert, the Cascadia subduction zone and the Aleutian and Alaska subduction zone, which are closer, poses the most threat to the city of Prince Rupert. For this reason, those are the two that were considered in this study. Just in a nutshell, the Cascadia subduction zone extends from northern Vancouver Island all the way down to the northern end of California. It is, in BC in general, the most threatening source for a tsunami, given its very close or proximity to the mainland, which results in very, very short warning times. And historically, it has produced a large tsunami as a result of a great earthquake of a 9.0 magnitude. This tsunami was discovered based on geological records, as well as historical written records from Japan, but also oral traditions from the First Nation. On the other end, the Alaska-Aleutian subduction zone, which extends from the Alaska Range to Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, has produced several great or large earthquakes in the last century, and notably the one from 1964, which has produced the largest tsunami waves on record and quite some damage in the city of Port Alberni on Vancouver Island. Also of concern are tsunamis that are generated by landslides, and how this occur essentially is when you have a large amount of debris, such as rocks or earth, that falls rapidly into the water, that will displace the water and create a potentially very large wave, which can be very destructive, although the effect of this wave is very localized to the source of the landslide or the location of the landslide. Just an example of that is a landslide that occurred in 1958 in Lituya Bay in Alaska, where the water was pushed across the fjord to elevations or heights up to 500 meters against the opposing shore. So to quantify or look at this concern, LiDAR survey was performed as part of this study to complete the city's database of ground elevation data, as well as geomorphic analysis. Now, the LiDAR was conducted in the summer of 2018, and what this LiDAR really provides to geologists is an image or an idea of the different features on slopes that could be a sign of slope instability. Now, as well, satellite images were assessed and aerial photographs, as well as bathymetry or underwater information. Now, the important point here is that these analyses show very little evidence or no evidence of slope instability in Prince Rupert. And for that reason, the results of the modeling associated to Test. Okay, seems to be working well. This slide over here shows the fluctuation or the variation in water surface in time following the occurrence of the earthquake. Okay, good. So the pink curve corresponds to the Cascadia subduction zone tsunami. The first wave would arrive approximately 4 hours after the earthquake, and the maximum increase in water level would be roughly half a meter. Now, the important concept here to understand is that this increase in water level is above whatever water level there is in the ocean or in the harbor at Prince Rupert. If it's a high tide, you would have the high tide, and you would superimpose this half-meter increase in water level. Also interesting to note is that there's not just one tsunami wave, but there's a series of them, and the period between them is roughly an hour and a half. Now, the Alaska Aleutian tsunami, there's also a first wave that will come approximately 4 hours after the earthquake, but the maximum increase in water level, which is approximately 1 meter, that will occur during the second wave of the tsunami, which would be about 5 hours and a half after the occurrence of the earthquake. Now, I will show you a short video which is working. So what you have on the video on the right scale, red indicates an increase in water level, while blue indicates a decrease in water level. So this, you have the first wave arriving, and then the trough of the wave. And the important thing to point here is that there's lots of variation spatially about the increase in water level. And also in temporally, it changes a lot. The take home really from this slide is that it's very difficult to predict what will be the conditions in the vicinity, and as well what they predict them will be very challenging at understanding them, and this will last for several hours. We're talking, the video keeps going until 20 hours, so roughly a day that you have very quickly varying water levels and high currents in the vicinity. I just had this slide in case the video did not work. Now, this slide presents the maximum increase in water level in the vicinity of Prince Rupert, and reported as well at areas or locations of interest. So really the highest increase in water level will occur at the very end of the inlet towards the Lac Sequelin ferry terminal. So we have a 1.5 meter increase in water level. Although in the vicinity of the city of Prince Rupert, roughly we're talking about a meter in increase in water level. Now, in terms of current velocities, however, we have very, very high velocities that will be produced in narrow passages, as there's differences in water elevation between different areas of the harbor, for instance, so the different water bodies. Notably, near the Digby Island Ferry, we have an increase in 6 knots, which is considerable, especially for navigation and marine facilities and any operation that are occurring by the water. Okay, so as an outcome or deliverable of the study, flood maps were produced. Essentially for the green squares, detailed results of changes in current velocity as well as overland inundation depth were produced for all the area within those green squares. And more precisely, you see that the dash rectangles, that's where you have the maps show detailed results of both, or mostly the inundation depth. This is an example of a map showing current velocities. You have Metlakatla Passage to the north there, and the main approach to the harbor to the right of the map. Now, what we see, the color red is, I can see it's roughly 2 meters per second. If you double that, that becomes roughly 4 knots. So this is an increase in 4 knots in current velocity, which can also alternate in direction as the wave propagates inside the harbor and outside the harbor. and these conditions can last several hours. So this is just an example of the maps that have been produced as part of this assignment. And using this map and knowledge of the assets and other aspects of the area, a risk assessment was undertaken, and for that I will leave the floor to my colleague Graham.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here on such a sunny day. I've been here many times, but never so much sun. The first time I was here, I shouldn't say this because it dates me, but the first time I was here, abalone was on the menu at the Crest Hotel, and Pete Lester was mayor. Risk assessment is basically looking at the likelihood of an event happening or the probability times the consequence. So it's kind of a multiplication ratio here. But so some of the likelihood events that we look at are things like flood hazards. Typically, BC has looked at a 1 in 200 risk of flood hazards for river and tidal surges, and some jurisdictions are looking at up to 1 in 500 to reduce that risk. If you look at seismic hazards for geotechnical for building permit purposes, it's 1 in 2,475 years. So that's kind of the range. If we get below that, and that's where the reference to landslide risk was. The evidence that John Clegg had indicated was that based on bathymetric maps, this probably hasn't happened since the last ice age. So we're looking at an event of over 10,000 years, and that's where it becomes questionable that do you try to mitigate an event which may never happen. What I'm looking at here is basically looking at some of the consequences in the event of the tsunami. Basically, the qualitative risk assessment was based on the simulations that Philippe described. There is one series of maps at the inundation depth. Those are the more detailed ones, in particular at 1 to 5,000 scale, and the velocity maps at a regional scale of 1 to 30,000, and under both current sea level and sea level rise conditions of 1 meter. The risk assessment had separate calculations based on a Alaska Aleutian subduction zone tsunami and one on Cascadia. And in all cases, the Cascadia one is similar, but the scale is reduced. So the risk assessment was really based on the Alaska Aleutian because we looked at the worst case scenario. The primary assessment area is the City of Prince Rupert, municipal assets, and the airport. The secondary assessment area is areas outside the city and port and marine assets not owned by the city. And there's some very good results. All emergency facilities, by that I mean Emergency Operations Center, City Hall, the designated evacuation centers, the primary one, the Civic Center, and Charles Hayes Secondary School as a backup one, police station, fire department, ambulance station, Prince Rupert Regional Hospital. These core emergency facilities are not at risk because they're located above or away from where any tsunami would occur. Residential areas. All of the residential areas in the city, neighborhoods, seniors facilities, daycare facilities, they're all located outside any risk area. Downtown Prince Rupert, the same thing. Prince Rupert Airport, the same thing. Highway 16, Yellowhead Highway, all major roads in the official community plan. Energy infrastructure, 2 major 69 kV lines coming into the city, and 4 substations, including the main one, the Oldfield Station, are all located well above any potential tsunami area. And CN Rail. It rings the city, and in most instances, the elevation of CN Rail is minimum of 6 meters above sea level, and we're looking at a maximum inundation of around 2 meters. So we've got about 4 meters that the rail line is above, plus protected by riprap. So these are the assets that have I guess you can't say nothing. There's zero risk, but they effectively they must be considered not at risk. There's a number of areas where there is not zero risk, but certainly some risk. The ferry terminal at Digby Island, the velocity going by at that particular location is about 3.1 meters per second. So there is some risk there because the ferry terminal juts out right into Venn Channel as it turns around, and the velocities are highest, the second highest in all of the study area in that particular location. So there's some risk there. The mariners are at some risk. They would vary whether there's a breakwater or not. The types of support structures, whether they're steel pilings or wood pilings, and some variation there. I think we've got very low risk on the municipal water supply. The as-built drawings were reviewed, and the Fern Passage crossing is about 380 meters crossing. Most of the passage is between 20 and 20 meters below sea level, and the pipe is lying in the base of the channel there. On the east side of the channel, it's cut into the rock, which is quite steep, and has a cover of at least 300 millimeters there. And on the west side, which is much less steep slope, the area near the foreshore has typically a 700 millimeter surrounding area plus a width of about 3,000 millimeters. So there's a significant armored protection for your water supply there. But you can't say that it's zero risk because we're looking at high velocities going through there, compounded by the potential of logs breaking up, log booms in that area. So that poses a potential risk, but the risk appears to be very low. Some risk at Cow Bay because we have buildings jutting out from the high water mark into the harbor. In many cases, we're looking at very solid protection, but you can't say that it's guaranteed. The secondary assessment area, looking at Prince Rupert Port Authority facilities, generally we have very low vulnerability. For example, in Ridley Island, all of the facilities, the major bulk terminals are located well above any potential risk. The only area where there'd be any risk would be offloading facilities, where you're going right into the ocean, and you can't avoid that. The Fairview Terminal, for example, is about 3+ meters above the highest level that would ever occur, and the terminal was built in a curving link going north. So as the tsunami would come in, it would be channeled in a directional flow that would move away from the risk. And around the corner, you're looking at the ferry terminals, which are in the harbor area, where we're looking at velocities of 0.5 meters per second. So it's quite low there. But we can't say there's zero risk because we have offloading facilities. Port Edward Harbor Authority facilities, marinas, probably an area at some risk because we're right at sea level and we can't avoid that. Lac Kw'alaams, the ferry terminal on the Cane Island side, we're looking at very low velocities in the harbor there, and also very low velocities right where the ferry terminal is located, even though it's just to the east of where the velocities are very high in Venn Passage. But they're in a protected area which has very low velocities. Digby Island rural areas, there is some risk, probably least in Dodge Cove because you have an area that's got very low velocities with the three sides that are around the residential area. It is three sides of land and only one side on the ocean. probably a little bit more risk farther south, Charles Point and those areas. Port Edward, very low risk. Marine vessels, in general, probably the safest place to be is in the middle of the harbor, where we have very low velocities. In terms of recommendations, a number of areas we've identified. The emergency management plan has got some very excellent material, and in terms of recommendations, the areas we've identified are just elaborating and filling in some details. The section dealing with tsunami is a 2-page document, and with the benefit of the information from this study, more detail can be added, I think, to identify some procedures that would flow out of this report. The communications plan is another example. One of the things that probably, I guess, at biggest change is if you look at the provincial website, it talks about up as low as 5 minutes warning in some parts of lower BC. There isn't that distinguishing reference to conditions in northern BC, and I think many people will find that BC has got most of its population where they're focused on the Cascadia issue, but here the big risk is the Alaskan one. So that should hopefully inform the provincial documentation, because one of the great advantages that this study is indicating is that there's a significant lead time to prepare and hunker down in the event of a tsunami. So things that would flow out, evacuation signage, we haven't identified areas, virtually no areas where we're looking at overflow areas. So evacuation signage does not mean you need to climb Mount Hayes. We only have to go a relatively short distance to be at a potential refuge area. So signage and all those other things can easily flow out of that. You've got an excellent brochure, some very minor modifications. One of the examples that in your own emergency management plan is identified is questioning whether there is merit in evacuating Kane Island. And given that there's no residential areas at risk, it doesn't seem to make sense to talk about evacuating the island to funnel everybody out into Port Edward at 1/10 the population, or an hour and a half away to Terrace. So that's an area which I think merits some discussion. So waterfront evacuation, I guess key recommendations would be, even though we have very low risk in many areas, things like shutting down loading facilities, securing tie lines, mooring lines to ships, and mustering procedures where would be safe locations, how far you need to go to reach a safe location. Those are things that could occur out of the in your brochure and also in the communication plan. Update for the OCP, some possibilities would be, you're looking, I believe, at a next year for an update. Some elements of the OCP update dealing with risk mitigation and resilience would be helpful to be included in that. In terms of the zoning bylaw, you're fortunate in that you don't have a lot of residential areas right on the waterfront, and it's good to keep it that way. You might want to consider whether houseboats are not an issue. It's quite significant in parts of the Lower Mainland, but whether you want to allow houseboats in the future is something that's probably a good time to revisit that. Your C5 zoning, the marine commercial zoning does allow some residential. So a few areas in the zoning bylaw are worth revisiting. But yeah, as I say, the general recommendations are that we whether it's good luck or good planning. I'm a planner, so I like to think that the predecessors of the city have done an excellent job, because on your, for example, your road system, they finger down from higher elevations, so you don't have perimeter roads around the entire island, which would put things at much greater risk. So there's some very fortunate situations which have occurred, and just the recommendation is keep it that way.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions from council?
Yeah, just two quick slides. Just to wrap up, the city is vulnerable to tsunamis that can come from many areas around the Pacific, but mainly from Alaska and the Aleutian Island. And the Alaska tsunami essentially is the one that should be more of a concern if a warning was triggered from an incoming tsunami from that area. I'm just going to wrap up quickly without necessarily reiterating what Graham just mentioned here. But essentially, there's very limited upland flooding, and main of the concern is the activities that are occurring on the waterfront, the marine facilities, and the marine operations that are more of a concern to hazards. The analysis that were conducted showed no evidence of slope instability near the city. So probability of landslide generated tsunamis are considered to be quite low, but further geotechnical studies recommended to confirm those findings before any risk assessment to that matter is undertaken. And we also found that the effect of sea level rise does not influence the behavior of the tsunami, meaning that the results that we obtain also apply to any outcome of sea level rise, whatever the future holds for us. So this concludes our presentation. Thank you very much for your interest and attention, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Councillor Nish.
I just want to say thank you, and obviously it's a fairly good news report for us, and I'm sure our city staff will be working hard to implement the few recommendations that you've done, but obviously from our standpoint, it's great to see that we won't be drastically affected by a tsunami if it were to happen. Thank you again.
Anybody else has any question? Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks very much. Just a couple of questions. The first one is 1964 was well documented. What effect did that have on Prince Rupert?
I would have to review such information. Near Tofino, the waves that arrived there were in order of 2 to 3 meters. So technically, to be honest, now looking at this, is the event of 1964 was the event that was simulated in our simulations here. So the results presented actually are a prediction or hindcast of what might have occurred during the 1964 event. Now, a very good exercise would be to try to look at the records of the city or interview individuals that might have been present at that time, and obtain their inputs as how does this represent what actually happened at that time.
And one of the other things is, with the exception of Tuck, Fen, and a few narrow passages, the velocity of the water is almost the same as flood tide. It's something I noticed when you just did your presentation. So even for boats that are caught in the navigable waters, it's probably not going to be very, very significant event to them. But getting back to I know the last tsunami scare we had was off the west coast of Queen Charlotte's, and there was, I think, a 2.2 meter rise in the sea at Langara buoy there. And by the time it got here, it was nothing. It was just a ripple. And I've often heard people say, because of the outlying islands around Prince Rupert, including the Queen Charlotte's, most stuff is broken up before it even gets to us. But I find the report really, really good, and I'm happy to hear the results of it.
Just to comment on your observation there. Yes, the velocity that are induced by the tsunami are the same, scale or are similar to, tidal induced velocity. There are some areas, however, and this is more in detail in the maps, where we have quite, large increase in velocity, and this is these velocities could be added to the current velocities. For instance, the tidal effects as the effect of the tsunami waves. There's quite a few waves that come in. That can last, in the order of days. You still have the tides that are still occurring at that time, and the large tidal range here in Prince Rupert can also induce large velocity. So the compounded effect can then also, affects the risk of that effect. And the Queen Charlotte earthquake, the the tsunami was created on the western side of the island, and tsunami waves tend to propagate in a direction that's perpendicular to the fault. So in this case, the main brunt of that tsunami was propagating offshore in the Pacific Ocean, but it also propagates in both directions along the fault. So it can also it probably affected the Haida Gwaii Island, under the west coast of Haida Gwaii Island more significantly.
Anybody else? Thank you for your very thorough study and all the recommendations. And I'm pretty sure this study will help our community a long way. Thank you. So our next item of business is application for development various permit at 998 First Avenue West. So now we have opportunity for public to comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak to this application? Please approach the front and speak into the microphone. Second time, anybody like to speak on this application? Third time, please, anybody like to speak on this application, please come forward. Having no person come forward, the opportunity for public comment on this agenda topic is now closed. Next item of business is report from the city planner regarding application for development variance permit 998 First Avenue West. Welcome.
Ooh, I may need a hand here, Veronica. Technology baffles me every time. I got it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This application received council approval to proceed to public notifications at the last regular council meeting on May 13th. The full application is attached to, including attachment number 1. The subject property is located at 998 First Avenue West. The purpose of the proposed variance is to retain the deck as the extent of the proposed renovations renders the existing non-conforming status to no effect. So this is the existing deck that's encroaching onto the lane. The application is to reduce the variance from the required 3 meters to 0 lot line, as illustrated on a proposed slide. The applicant met with the engineering department, which confirms that the encroachment agreement is imminent and subject to applicant receiving the variance approval. Public notifications were distributed as per the development procedure bylaw, and as of the date of this report, and indeed up to and including today, staff did not receive any inquiries. And in conclusion, Mr. Mayor, as of the date of this report, staff did not receive any, and indeed today, any objections that would prevent approval of this variance.
Thank you.
That concludes my report.
Anybody has a question?
I was just going to move it.
Okay. Anybody has a question? Okay. So, recommendation that the development various permit application for 998 First Avenue West proceed to final consideration. Moved by Councillor Nish, second by Councillor Bro. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is a report from the communication manager regarding child care assessment recommendation. Would you like to speak anything?
Sure. So as Judy actually pointed out earlier in the meeting, recently we received funding from UBCM to complete a child care assessment and plan. And so this is essentially us bringing back our recommendation for this successful proponent to council for consideration. Quite honestly, we received a number of really qualified applicants, and this particular proponent floated to the top, but we actually were very lucky in that we had a number of qualified applicants come forward with proposals for this project. So we're in a good position, which is nice to see.
Okay, thank you. So we have a recommendation that council consider staff's recommendation to select Watson Projects as the successful bidder to complete the city's child care assessment and action plan. Moved by Councillor Nish, second by Councillor Skelter Morvan. Discussion. Councillor Cunningham.
Veronica, you say here that including GST and the remaining costs associated with the project will be nominal costs for print, engagement materials, room rentals, and staff time. Do you have any idea what that's going to add up to?
So I think it probably should be in the range of around $200 to $300, I would anticipate. We've talked to the Director of Recreation, and because part of his portfolio is community services, we've talked about using recreation facilities as the space, so room rentals kind of null and void there, and then just having in-house printing for some of the materials and engagement. And so that's some of my time to advertise maybe on Facebook and those kinds of things. So we'll try to keep costs at a minimum.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question? Discussion? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next, we have correspondence for action. We have recommendation that the City of Prince Rupert endorse and sign the BC Alliance for Healthy Living's Community on the Move Declaration, and that any future recommendation made by the BC Alliance be given consideration on a case-by-case basis. Moved by Councillor Moreau, second by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion?
I'm happy to speak in favor of this motion. I think it's an interesting cross-section of consensus. It's not often you can get people with mobility challenges, businesses, environmental outcomes, and human health and safety all coming together over one objective. So I'm happy to speak in favor. And the other thing I would just add, whatever the snafu was in delaying the meeting, I think it's kind of a happy coincidence that it just happens to be Bike to Work Week when this motion comes on the agenda.
Any other comment?
Question.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item for correspondence is recommendation that Council proclaim June 15, 2019 as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in the City of Prince Rupert. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's about the elders. Okay, moved by Councillor Nish, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion?
Question.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item is recommendation that Council proclaim the month of June 2019 at Recreation and Park Month in the City of Prince Rupert. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Nish. Any discussion? Question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next one is our bylaw verbal report from the, I think, Chief Financial Officer regarding revision bylaw number 3444, please, regarding the property waste located on 1051 Chamberlain Avenue.
Thank you. This is a revision bylaw to correct a clerical error in which Schedule A was referenced but was not included in bylaw numbers 3438-2019 and 3439-2019. The missing schedule was included in the presentation materials at the public hearing for both bylaw amendments just prior to the regular meeting on the same day. So Council did have the opportunity to see the schedule prior to making a decision on whether to adopt the bylaws. This revision bylaw is the process by which we can add the missing schedule and clarify the original bylaws adopted on May 13th.
Thank you. So, recommendation that Council give first and second reading to the revision bylaw number 3444 2019. Moved by Councillor Nish, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next, our item is report, question and inquiry from the member of council. Anybody? Councillor Eddy.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One is just being in Prince Rupert over this past weekend with the sun shining and recognizing all of the vibrant activities that were taking place. I just want to acknowledge some of that. Just off the top of my head, the Salmon Fest, the Relay for Life, acknowledging all of the effort that went into that. I'm pretty surprised that Councillor Cunningham ever did get out of jail. But get out of jail he did, and so he's here. Also, the firefighters who put on the car wash in the Civic Center parking lot, the Sunken Gardens activities, and also at the theater, the Rockstock show put on by Ring System Music. And I know from personal experience that the effort and pride that goes into that on the part of a lot of young people in Prince Rupert. So it's a fantastic weekend on that score. I wish we could do that every weekend. So that's the one item. The other one is a question. I was in Terrace. I was actually at Lake Else on May long weekend. So I was struck by the speed of some of the quads and some of the activities that were going on. And then just after that, a news article came out about the RCMP's experience of that in the Lake Else area and how difficult that was for them. And I guess I just have a question that maybe we could pursue an answer to, and that is, what does that look like closer to home in terms of police, the challenges facing police on a May long weekend here? I don't know the answer to that, so I'm simply asking.
Thank you. Anybody else have Cunningham? Councillor?
Okay, a year ago, 2 years ago, this would have been a funny question, but with the hot weather we're having around here and the fact that last summer in Rainforest and Vancouver Island they had some wildfires, I'd like to know what contingency plans we have for wildfires in our area. So, taking one look at Mount Hayes, if a fire ever started up there with our southeast winds, it would come towards the city, and the only fire break I see we've got is the golf course. So it's something I'd like the city staff to look into. The fact that we've only got one evacuation route in and out of Prince Rupert and that, it might be something that we might never have to worry about. But climate change is coming, I guess, and as much as we enjoy the sunshine, there's other aspects of it that come with it that are not as nice as a tan.
Thanks for your concern. Anybody else? Just like we have a CFest coming pretty soon, and it was discussed in our previous meetings about including rainmakers in our parade. So is any correspondence done with that rainmaker team? Like we discussed to include in our parade this year?
I believe if the Rainmakers were to be a part of the parade, they could speak with the Special Events Society.
Thank you. If no more questions or inquiries, then
Just to add to it, since you brought up Seafest, if anybody has spare time, I'm sure the Special Events Society would love to have you come volunteer. They need someone just to usually stand by barricades during the parade, and I'm sure if you contact them in the office in the lower section of the City Hall, they would be love to see you.
yeah, I agree that. Anybody else has any question? No more question or inquiries. I like to entertain motion to adjourn this meeting. Moved by Councillor Eddy, second by Councillor Skelter Morburn. All in favor? Opposed? More meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.